Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be tuning in from. Welcome to episode 105-ish, something like that, Jason. 105,
Something
I
like that.
believe. It's over 100 now, and this is going to be a first in a multi-part series. Jason, what are we going to be talking about?
So we're going to be talking about cloud protection trends. So last week we just got off of Veeam on update. Super excited. It was fun to be part of that particular event. And at the event on November 3rd, if you want to go back and take a look, we announced the cloud protection trends report. Let's go ahead and bring up some data from an earlier research project to kind of help us understand why we did this. So when you look at this, so this is actually, Dave, this represents 8,000 organizations over 4 different years of research over time. And what you see here is, or three, I guess, 2020, 2021, 2022, what percentage of their infrastructures were physical in the data center, virtual in the data center, and or cloud hosted. And in each of 21 and 22, we also asked what it was going to be 2 years later, and that gets you 23 and 24. So a 5-year run rate. And really the trend that you ought to be looking at is on that right-hand side, right? So the roughly half of environments are in the data center, half cloud hosted, and that trend just continues to eke up notch by notch. Now, combine that with what we saw in what as enterprise buyers looking for in data protection, the number one thing they said they were looking for was that it would be able to protect modern workloads that are running in IaaS and SaaS. So we took all that together and said we need to do some deeper research on that, and that is the Cloud Protection Trends for 2023 report at a website near you.
Yeah, what I love about this specific research, meaning the cloud protection trends, you can see over on the left-hand side, we wanted to break this down in a few different areas. Jason always likes to say the cloud is not a thing because there is no singular as it comes to cloud. And we're actually going to see that play out in multiple ways from the research, but just from how and what we asked, we wanted to look specifically at infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, SaaS, in particular, Microsoft 365, which we see as kind of the poster child for
Sure.
one of the most deployed business critical SaaS applications. Then availability, meaning backup as a service, disaster recovery as a service, and a little bit about how you chose your managed service provider. So Jason, 1,700 unbiased, meaning these aren't just Veeam customers. This is
Nope.
representative of the whole industry. So there's some Veeam customers in there, but generally it's predominantly not Veeam, probably to the tune of about 90% not Veeam, somewhere in that range. But Jason, they can click this QR code that you've got up, or you can go to VE.am/CPT Cloud Protection Trends 23 for 2023. Let's jump into it.
Yeah. So one of the fun parts about this particular research was we really wanted to make sure we understood all the different personas that were involved along the way. So one thing that, we learned 15 years ago when Veeam was first getting started, we saw that when virtualization was brand new, there's the traditional IT operations folks, and they ran the rest of the data center. And then the admin, the virtualization admin, would be running just their own thing because it was new. And certainly when we look at all the different clouds that are represented here on the left-hand side, there's IaaS admins, and there are PaaS admins, and there are certainly M365 SaaS admins, right? And then there are those folks that are also responsible for backup on and off-prem, et cetera. So part of these 1,700 is the fact that we're actually able to survey multiple different personas, all of which are something as a service, and then looking at how those opinions align or not. What I thought we'd do is just kind of tease a little bit of the data that's going to be covered over the rest of this 7-week blog series. The first one that we thought would be really interesting to look at is where do workloads come from before they come to the cloud? And oh, by the way, is it a one-way trip? Right. So on that left-hand side, what you're looking at is of all the workloads that were spun up in the 12 months prior to the survey, where did they come from if they're now running in infrastructure as a service or cloud-hosted infrastructure? And Dave, I love the fact that, we did this report in 2021. Now we're doing the 2023 iteration, and it's still roughly even thirds between a third were physical boxes, a third were virtual machines, and a third are cloud first. They just started up in the cloud. They weren't from a data center of anywhere.
Yeah, exactly. So roughly a third or 30% born in the cloud. However, lift and shift is still taking place. So to me, Jason, that says if you're going to look at protection in this kind of environment, you need to look for a solution that can handle data mobility, data migration, obviously physical and virtual, and the ability to hopefully interface very well with the cloud that you're looking to land on.
Yeah, and if you think about like on that enterprise buyer slide that we showed at the beginning from the data protection trends research report that was earlier in the year, I think the reason why when they could choose only what was most important in an enterprise backup solution, the number one thing was being able to protect IaaS and SaaS. And if you think about it, there's a lot of legacy backup solutions out there that can back up the legacy workloads that are running in the data center. But as workloads are embracing this cloud first approach and as they're now running in a cloud, the question is, can I continue to protect them with that same reliability, that same assurance along the way? And so when we look at this fluidity, actually, we're going to see that in a second, but the idea of hybridity, can I use that as a word? Of where all the workloads come from, that's where I think this starts to become really important. Let's go ahead and look at that fluidity concept on the right-hand side. So the left shows where they came from. The right shows, did they stay there? Did they stay in the cloud? And so what you see here, 12% said, we've never brought a workload from the cloud back on-prem. 12%. So flip that over, 88% said, yes, we have brought workloads from the cloud back on-prem. And in fact, you can see here, it's a pretty even mix. Dave, there's lots of different reasons why folks are bringing data back. Walk us through it.
Yeah, what I like is the fact that, that adds up to over 100%, meaning those
Sure.
green bars. And of course, if you count in the 12% as well, which means there's a variety of reasons on average that a typical organization might bring data back. And this doesn't have to be viewed in any way as a negative, meaning the plan could always have been, I want to develop in the cloud, go into production, or the pandemic forced me to burst into the cloud sooner
Right.
than I might have, or even unintentionally, mean I didn't plan to do that. Now that I can hopefully get gear, now that I can get back in the data center, et cetera, then this, that was a stopgap of which I now want to resume normal operations. So that's what we're seeing on the green bars here. A few different reasons why. One, I brought it back during a disaster.
Sure.
No, I just migrated from not only one cloud to back on-prem, Jason, but cloud A to cloud B
Good
could
point.
be very valid use case as well. Let's say suddenly your favorite hyperscaler of who you might be using their office productivity as a service says, we're going to give you credits. Well, someone says, especially in the finance group, says we ought to be using those credits.
Yeah.
Let's go into production or find a way to go leverage that. So a lot of reasons why, but I like your hybridity, your fluidity notion. What it really is saying, and what we see time and time again, it feels like, is very few things or use cases or deployment models go away, go to zero.
Yep.
The mix changes, and sometimes it changes over time, but the ability to try to leverage that mix or have that choice remains constant.
Yeah, I think the key thing that we're continuing to see is that hybrid is not a one-way street, right? So
Mm.
just that idea that the workloads are going to go to the cloud, they're going to come back again, they're going to go in between clouds, and as you mentioned earlier, that's going to have direct ramifications on an organization's data protection strategy. So, speaking of strategy, one of the other key tenets in this particular research project was looking at all the different personas and who's involved in defining data protection strategy. And also, in a few seconds, we'll see who's clicking the mouse. So, I really like this question. We've asked this question for the last couple of years. And if you go back a couple of years in some of these research reports, you'll see that central IT is almost always sitting at the head of the table. If you will. But what we're seeing is actually, I think, a better representation. It used to be that the lines were more like this, it was more like a cut. And now it's much more evenly balanced. And if you think about even take cloud out of the picture for a second, if you just think about what does it take for a modern workload? Well, the IT ops folks have an opinion, and the backup folks have an opinion, and the app owner has an opinion, and the business unit has an opinion. So I think there's a lot of different stakeholders that are thinking about how should we protect data. Now we're going to put it in the cloud. It's an even broader set of stakeholders, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a maturation statement. And I think what we're seeing is Just like many business processes, there's a number of constituencies that need to be involved to come up with the best response, best plan.
Yeah. Now, there might be a lot of people deciding what we should do, but who's actually clicking the mouse? It's the backup admin. Now, in this case, when you look at the chart on the right, there's actually two different views that you should be thinking about. This is represented when the IaaS or PaaS in the organization is also using backup as a service, in which case we see that the BaaS service providers team is actually doing the backups for them about 1/4 of the time. So outsourcing the management and monitoring as well. The remainder is roughly 2 to 1, right? 52 versus 22, 2 to 1-ish, a little over that, maybe 2.2-ish to 1, of where the backup team is responsible versus the cloud admin. Now, Dave, I really like this in that if you think about 15 years ago, if you think about Vert, originally the Vert admin had to do the backups because it was so complex, it needed a different skill set, et cetera. We've really seen a shift back to the backup admin for IaaS and PaaS, and I'm going to argue that's because of the maturity of the tools and the maturity of the point of view of the organization that backups need to be done.
Yeah, I like that. I like the idea of, this is deemed mission critical, important to the business, therefore important to protect. But I think your point about, looking at the history of, virtualization, or at least open systems virtualization, originally there wasn't even a virtual admin, it was a server admin. And then we created a virtual admin team, our term. And then that group basically said, I don't want to do the backup. This is mainstream enough now. Let's have the people that worry about the rest of the physical systems do this. And I think that's what you're seeing here as well. As this is not a science fair project or something off to the side. This is mainstream business now, meaning take what's happening in the cloud taking place up there. So let's have that center of excellence, the backup team that knows how to do these things. They major in this. Let's let them largely go and do it.
Yeah, and our friend Corinne Bissett, also from Office of CTO, she jokes about this as if you're letting the backup team do the backups are actually getting done. Right? As you mentioned, there's probably never been a cloud admin who said, when I grow up, I'd like to be a backup guy. Right? That just doesn't happen in our space. So I love the fact that you're actually seeing that maturation back. I also think it has something to do with the fact that tools get a little better as well. So that becomes more and more mainstream in expectation. This is not the only area, by the way. You should presume that same thing is happening around security controls. You should be thinking the same thing around monitoring and costing. It's just, again, just part of the maturation perspective. There's one more maturation thing. Let's use this as our third teaser for our session for today. It's often not uncommon, especially in as a service, where when the workload first comes out, folks think, oh, the cloud, it's durable, right? Natively resilient. Maybe I don't have to back that up anymore. And Dave, that's not what this chart shows.
No, it really doesn't. And it's been a pleasure to see, but it's been interesting to see how fast this has been rising, meaning the notion of the masses, being coming to the conclusion, being of the mind that, hey, this is important business information. I need to protect this. There's a difference between infrastructure, durability, the provider being up and available, and my data having integrity, not being deleted, not being compromised, not being without my ability to answer to legal hold or external
Sure.
requirements. So in short, I think people are realizing, yeah, the cloud is very resilient. It's still my data. I still need to make sure that we're managing this appropriately. I'm the one on the hook, not the provider. There, if you read the fine print, there's nowhere in there where your data is guaranteed 100% integrity. That's still on you. So I think 78% is a great number. But Jason, what about the kind of the grayish one and the reddish ones at the bottom?
Yeah, let's look on the bottom parts of it. So I love the fact that folks are finally understanding that this is a grown-up, mature, mainstream application that the organization is relying on, which means you have to back it up, right? So only 3% on the bottom of the chart say it's resilient. You don't have to back it up. Everybody needs previous versions, right? Everyone needs to get back to that. And it used to be not that long ago, even in 2021, the primary protection solution of choice for M365 was the recycle bin, right? And that was good. If you deleted files in your mailbox and you needed them back from yesterday, God bless the recycle bin. You got ransomware, somebody went in and deleted a whole folder, whatever that case might be. That's not, and then you figure out a month later, that's not the recycle bin's job. Right. So I love the fact that only 3% are incorrectly assuming that Microsoft handles it for them or that it's not necessary. I love the fact that 4% are only 4% are using the recycle bin. I respect the 4% that are still looking for a solution. But I think the thing I like best is when you add up those top two values, it is well more than 100%. Right. So I think a lot of folks have finally figured out that legal hold and e-discovery tools and all of those premium lock features in, say, the premium SKUs on 365, E3, E5, pick your favorite letter, put a number behind it. There's probably a version of that. But that's not a replacement for backup, right? There's lots of other things like role identity access and security controls, and lots of reasons why you should be investing in those premium tiers of M365. Backup's just not one of them. And so the fact that nearly 4 out of 5 organizations get it and are doing backups, and that there's significant overlap from those organizations that are also using the premier tiers, this is such good news, frankly, for M365 users and Veeam.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, this was our teaser, right? So we pulled a couple of our favorite data points for this. In fact, each one of these has a half a dozen friends that we're going to be covering as well. We're going to be going into, this is the first of a 7-part series that's going to take us actually well past the new year. But we're going to look for a couple weeks at infrastructure as a service. We got some guests that are going to be joining me while you are traveling around the world. We've got software as a service that we're actually going to be covering as well. Again, looking at Microsoft 365. Should also point out, by the way, that we just released a whole other research project
Yeah.
on Salesforce last month as well. So go to vee.am/SF22. That's Salesforce 22 for that one. But in this case, software as a service, we'll be looking at 365. And then we're going to spend a couple weeks on one of my favorite areas. We're going to look at backup as a service and DR as a service. 7 weeks going to take us all the way across the holidays into early January. So hope folks are sticking around for that.
Awesome. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Definitely encourage you to download the report. Jason and I always like to say you owe it to yourself to get educated. You owe it to yourself to get maybe some additional air cover that you can use internally in your organization to support what you're looking to do.
Thanks for watching. See
Thank
you
you.
next week.